work here. So if I have a scene like this, and I'll just put a plane on the floor. And then I'll create a light that will cast shadows. I'm just going to get rid of this film gate, or the resolution gate for a minute. So I show you how a couple of different lights work. So first, the kind of workhorse light has always been the spotlight. And if you want to place the spotlight, the easiest way to do it is just create it and then go to Panels, Look Through Selected. Then you're looking through the light, and then you can move around like it was a camera. So then we can just easily place it where we want it to be. So let's say something like this. Now you can see the light up here. You can see the light. So if I hit 7 on the keyboard, now it's going to show me the lighting regions. I'm just going to turn off the light back here. And by default, Maya won't render on-screen shadows. If you want to see the shadows on screen, you can go to somewhere. Oh yeah, under lighting in the panel and just turn on shadows, and then it will try and render out the shadows. Oops. So let's do a little bit of rendering, and then we'll look at doing the shadow layer for this one. So if I just render this out, you can see it's casting simple shadows with sharp edges, right? If we open up the attribute editor to look at this shadow, or this light, we open up shadows here. By default, it's going to turn on use ray trace shadows. And ray trace shadows will give you the most realistic shadows depending on the type of light you use. There's another option here that you can use called use depth map shadows, but you probably want to stick with ray trace shadows. What depth map shadows does is it looks at the scene through from the point of view of the light. So imagine we're looking through the light, or don't imagine it, let's look through the light. So now we're looking at through the light, and Maya assesses which objects are in front of other objects and that are under the light. So these spheres are blocking its view of this plane. So it would then create a texture with these black dots and apply it to the surface at the time of rendering. And so when you have things under here, like resolution of the depth map shadow, that's the resolution of the texture it's applying. So if it's really tiny texture, so if I turn on depth map shadows and I go do a tiny texture like 128 pixels by 128, you can see it's a more pixelated texture. If I go down to 16, you can see that's all the texture, the number of pixels it has to try and approximate those shadows. So you can use this. Usually if you want a sharp shadow, you have to go to a high number like 1024, whatever. So these numbers, we're always going in binary increments, so we're going 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2048, etc., etc. And Maya usually works best with that sort of stuff. But then we've got ray trace shadows here, which probably better to use. So you've got a setting for a light radius, and the light radius will, I'm just going to move one of these spheres down towards the ground so we can see some of the effects of this. The light radius will simulate a light that actually has some dimension, because this spotlight actually starts from an infinitesimally small point and spreads out, right, in a cone shape. But if you want real shadows where you get a penumbra and an umbra, you guys see. So if you have an object that's casting a shadow from a real light, it's going to have a shadow that kind of goes like this, right? Where it's going to be very dark and sharp here, and then it kind of softens out when it goes like that. Because this light is casting some light that goes past it, some light that strikes the object and causes the shadow, and some light from the other side that goes through on the other side. That's a terrible drawing, but anyway. Without some sort of shape to the light, it can't assess that. So what we do with light radius is simulate a light that has some dimension. So if I change this to 5 or something, well, let's just render it in the standard so we can compare. So super sharp, kind of like outer space. If we change this, I'll do something like 10, so it's quite big. I'll save this image and render this. So now it's giving us sort of what we want, in a sense, that it's sharper when it's close to the object, and you can see how the shadow tries to spread out more the farther from the object it is. But it's ugly, it's really grainy, right? So you have to imagine that even though we've given it some radius, it only has one shadow ray to shoot out to sample the scene, so it's going to hit things. So if you want to have a better quality shadow, you have to turn up shadow rays so it can sample the scene more frequently. So if I turn this up to 10, but our render time will start going crazy. I think I just unsmoothed this. Not crazy, but you know. So let's compare. So this is with no light radius. This is light radius of 10 but no extra shadow rays. And this is 10 with extra shadow rays. So you can see it's cleaning it up a bit. And you can keep bumping that up and up. You can also go into your render settings, and under the quality tab, you can turn up lighting quality and overall quality. So if I just turn up overall quality to 1 from 0.25, if I save this image, and render that. So you can see it's taking much longer, but we're getting cleaner and cleaner shadows. It's still a little gritty. But this is kind of a bad test case scenario because you'd often have another light in here doing some reflected light or filling in some of the gaps, and it would hide some of this ugliness. So we can do stuff like try and turn up lighting quality to 2 and see if that makes a difference. I don't know if that's any better. Can't tell. So I'll just save this image and we'll compare it to the last one. There's a little, it's hard, I can see on my screen a little bit of difference at lighting quality 2, but between 0.25 and 1, this is 1 overall quality, and that's 0.25. You can see there's a big increase in quality there. And so the question is, when is the quality good enough? It's when you're happy with it, essentially. It depends how close people are going to be looking at the screen, all sorts of things, like how it's going to be used. So with that in mind, those two things, light radius and shadow rays, let's look at an area light. So you guys Stuart might have encouraged you to use the new area lights, which are more realistic, but they require a little more care to use. So if I create a new physical area light and move it, another way to place a light is to hit T on your keyboard, and we'll make a target for it, so you can then move the target where you want it to go. So down here onto the floor, and move the light. Now you can see that it's hardly casting any light as I move it farther and farther away. On that screen you can probably barely see. You can just see the checkerboard showing up there. That's because by default these lights are set to quadratic fall off, which is simulates real-world light fall off through atmosphere. If I turn that to no decay, then we'll get full light. It's more realistic to use quadratic or cubic or something like that, but you have to really bump up the values. So let's just leave it at that, and let's turn this up to 1,000. Do a quick render. So the area light, because it actually has a shape, it automatically gives you light radius. It has a shape already. So you get that sharper edge. Let me move this up, sorry. You get that sharper edge of the shadow here, and it gets softer as you go away. So how do you control that stuff? Well, in the same way. You can go into the shadows here, and you can change the shadow rays. There's no light radius because its radius is determined by the size you make it. So if I just scale this up, you can see the lighting conditions are changing. So if I render this again, now with this giant light, oops. Let me just move in here. But you can already see it kind of makes a more realistic, when you're up close it's harder to tell, but it makes a more realistic lighting scenario because when it's this big, it's almost simulating a skylight where light is just leaking in and sort of spreading all around, so you get this kind of diffuse light. So that's one way to make kind of a diffuse light, but it's a bit of a gritty render. You can see all the graininess of it. So if we want to improve the quality of that in the light, we can turn up the shadow rays, let's say from 1 to 10. Let's save this image. Save this one. We just compare the two. I don't see any difference. It's getting close. There's no difference. I must be lying. Let's change this to 50. Crazy. Maybe there's a saturation point where adding more is not going to make much of a difference, although I'm surprised. Nope, I'm not seeing any change here. It feels like this lighting quality is overriding the changes I'm making here. But anyway, so let's put this back down, something reasonable. So when you're doing your shadow pass option here for the render you're doing now, if you're choosing an area light, you have to consider the size of it and the number of shadow rays that it's using. And just to show you how to set this up again, if I want to make a shadow pass here, where I'm just seeing the shadows on the floor, I'm going to add all of these things. I should create a shot can. Something like this. So I'm going to add all of these things to a new layer. I'll call this shadow. It's called shadow. And I want this thing to catch the shadow, so I'm going to put a use background shader on here. So I'll just right click and go to assign new material. Maya surface, use background. And for a shadow catching layer or shadow catching material, you want the specular turned down to 0, reflectivity down to 0, reflection mask to 0, and just leave shadow mask turned on. Now these other things, these spheres, you want them to cast shadows, but you don't want them to be rendered in the scene for this layer. So you can select these and right-click on Primary Visibility, create Layer Override, and turn that off. Oh, to do it one at a time. Have you guys used the attribute spreadsheet at all? So this is a handy thing in Maya. If you go up to Windows General Editors, there's the attribute spreadsheet. So if you have to change a single attribute on a lot of different objects, you can select them and then open the spreadsheet, and all of them will be loaded up. And then you just have to find the attribute you want to change. So we want to change the primary visibility, which will be under render here, I think. Yep, so here it is here. So if you just click and drag down all of them, type 0, and then they're all off. And it should create a layer override for each one. Yeah. So now if we render this, we should see this, which is nothingness. But if we look in the alpha channel, we still see nothing, which is not good. Why? Why? That makes no sense. Oops. Use background.
Is there a plane? So it's not casting a shadow?
There is a plane there. Yeah.
Red.
That's not the grid, no. It is there. Well, it usually works. Okay, I'm going to create another one. So if we just do a render without, oh, maybe I was doing it through the wrong camera. So with the primary visibility turned off, those spheres don't appear, but their shadows do. So now, if I put that use background shader on here, will it work? No. It will work. It'll work when you do it, I promise. It'll work really well. And don't make that noise like you don't believe me. I don't know why. It was just working. I did it for you.
Yeah.
I did it for you. It works. My computer just has stage fright. Let me just try with the spotlight. I think I'm probably just forgetting something. Okay, it works with the spotlight. It should work with the area light too, but this is in the alpha channel. So when you bring it into After Effects, it'll just appear black. But if you extract the alpha by interpreting it with pre-multiplied against black or whatever the background color is, then you'll just have these black spots that you can integrate into your scene. Okay.